Okay, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Porkins' Great Game. As always, I am your co-host, Pierce Redmond, and you can find this podcast and every other podcast I do by going to porkinspolicyreview.com. And joining us on the line all the way from Germany, as he does every single month, is our good friend and co-host, Christoph Gehrman. Christoph, how are you?
Hi, Pia. Thanks. I'm fine.
Great. Yeah. I know that I'm sure the listeners are a little bummed out. This has taken us a little bit of time, but Christoph and I were both extremely busy with a whole variety of activities, some of which we'll mention at the very end of the podcast. But I'm pretty excited about this episode because we're gonna be talking. As we do every month, Christoph and I discuss the geopolitics of Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the global war on terror. But we're going to kind of expand out the scope of what we talk about, and not specifically stick to our general geographical, forte. But we are going to start with a character who Christoph and I just absolutely love. He never seems to disappoint us. This is of course, our favorite politician turned war criminal turned Ukrainian politician, Mikheil Saakashvili. He is, he's at it yet again, causing political turmoil in his native country of Georgia. Saakashvili never manages to, surprise Christoph and I. But this recently started a little while ago. I think this was actually like closer to when we had put out the last episode. Then suddenly there were all of these amazing stories about Sakashvili that we didn't get to cover. But as I said, this started a little while back when the government attempted to shut down a very popular television station in Georgia, Rustavi 2, which is extremely close to Saakashvili's party, the United National Movement. I believe it's, one of the director is a member of the United National Movement. They
Yes,
basically,
he served as Minister of Justice and Minister of Education under Sakashvili.
yeah, there we go. Yeah, exactly. And basically, the outlet is essentially a propaganda, mouthpiece for Saakashvili and for the United National Movement as a whole. But anyway, the government, the current government, in Georgia, the Georgian Dream Coalition government, has been trying to shut down Rustavi too. And of course, the UNM leaders were sort of blaming this on Ivanishvili, who is again this billionaire Georgian businessman who at one point was more directly involved in the actual day-to-day government. Now he is not, but he's obviously seen as the sort of power behind the Georgian Dream Coalition. And as I said, the current owner of Rustavi 2 is the brother of the ex-defense minister under Saakashvili, who's now, of course, in political asylum in France. So this gives you another idea of how well connected the people in Rustavi 2 are. But anyway, and there's a whole sort of long legal battle that we're not going to get into about ownership and business law in Georgia. But essentially, all you have to know is that the government is trying to shut down Rustavi 2. Of course, the United States is not happy about this at all. Basically, this sort of back and forth sort of war of words is going on. Of course, with large groups of people on both sides of the political spectrum arguing back and forth with one another. Now, this was then followed by a series of leaked tapes of Saakashvili talking with two people. One was the Rustavi director, Nika Gavremia, and also with Gregory Bokiria, who is the ostensible head of the UNM. Now, in these leaked phone calls between the two of them, Saakashvili basically tells them to hire somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 militants that could, defend Rustavi too. He said to turn the station into a fortress, to start stockpiling water and food and all sorts of other necessities, and that they could instigate a very violent confrontation with the government. And in Saakashvili's own words, this would be great because it would start this whole revolution that would only last a couple of days, but it would result with, I don't know, him flying back into Tbilisi, for another Rose Revolution or something like that. Now, they were released on a website called Ukrainian Revolution. It's not at all clear how this website obtained the tapes. Of course, the instant response is that this is some sort of Russian, FSB website or something like that. And there's some evidence pointing to that, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But anyway, they were released on this website. And initially, everyone kind of denied it. But then they kind of had to walk that back, and both Bokaria and Gavremia confirmed the authenticity of the tapes. They said, yes, that is us talking about it. But then they kind of walked back their own comments and said, but obviously we didn't really do what Saakashvili asked us to do. They said, look, there's no fortress, there's no barricades, all this stuff, and they basically then kept complaining about how, this is just part of some, much larger illegal wiretapping program that's been in place in Georgia. Of course, we had nothing to do with it when we were in government. It's only, Ivanishvili and his ilk that are doing it. And Saakashvili responded on Facebook in a really amazing little post that we'll put in the show notes. But, he said this was all Russian intelligence, that the tapes were doctored, that, he's never been in favor of violent protests, but, he'll do anything possible to stop Ivanishvili. Now, the government has since started an investigation into what they're calling this botched coup. And also, this is coinciding with the ICC digging into the Russian-Georgian war. And as I said before, the State Department and the usual suspects like RFERL are not happy about the possible closure of this. If you read RFERL's coverage at all, you'd have no idea that Rustavi 2 is, a pro-Saakashvili news outlet. RFERL just talks about how it's the most popular, cutting edge, amazing Western,
independent.
Independent, exactly. Yeah, it's totally independent. Yeah, there's no shenanigans going on, according to RFERL. I'm sure, Brian Whitmore just absolutely loves Rustavi 2. So I guess there's a little bit more to this story, and there's even more leaks that'll come out. But Christoph, why don't you kind of piece together what's happening just with Rustavi 2 and fill in the blanks about this, because this has been an ongoing battle, and again we've seen this. I guess we've seen this quite a bit in the South Caucasus. There's in Azerbaijan, there was of course the shutting down of RFERL's bureau there, and that's become a sort of a normal occurrence. But flesh out a little bit what's going on with the Rustavi 2.
Yes, as you said, they are closely tied to the United National Movement, and therefore they have long been a thorn in the side of the current government. One member of the ruling party recently called Rustavi 2 a hostage of the United National Movement. And yes, after the TV channel has been bogged down in a property dispute with a former shareholder, Kiba Kalvashi, for quite some time, the Tbilisi City Court decided at the beginning of October to freeze Rustavi 2's assets. And this was seen as an attempt by the government to take control of the channel. And the Rustavi director, Gavremia, alleged that the former Prime Minister, Betsina Ivanishvili, was behind the court's decision. And both the UNM and the US Embassy in Tbilisi quickly came to Rustavi's help and condemned the court's decision, and the UNM tried to exploit this by calling for snap elections. But the other major opposition party, the Free Democrats, led by former Defense Minister Irakli Alassania, who is also a favorite of Brussels and Washington, they rejected their idea. And instead, the government went on the offensive against the UNM. On October 17th, another Saakashvili-era prison rape video somehow found its way onto the internet. It was uploaded on a Ukrainian website, which has probably something to do with the fact that Sakashvili is now in Ukraine. And this leak coincided with the release of the latest poll by the National Democratic Institute, showing a sharp decline in support for the government. They are now head-to-head with the United National Movement. And given the fact that the video was then publicly shown in Georgia on the next day, we can assume that the Georgian Dream government had something to do with this leak of the video. And as some may recall, similar leaks preceded the victory of the Georgian Dream Coalition in the 2012 parliamentary election, which spelled the beginning of the end for Saakashvili. And this time around, the release of the video had more or less the same effect. Angry protesters attacked several offices of the United National Movement across the country, while the police was standing idly by. And Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili even defended the attacks, saying that aggression is only natural in light of the leaked video, and that the United National Movement should be grateful that over the past 3 years people have not done the same to them, what is depicted in these videos. And he emphasized that the United Nations Movement has no right to remain in politics. And shortly after he made these remarks, the Georgian Security Service announced that this launched an investigation into a conspiracy to overthrow the government involving Saakashvili, his former national security advisor Bukeria, and then there emerged a transcript on a dubious Ukrainian website called Ukrainian WikiLeaks, which is hosted and registered in Russia, and which focuses on publishing anti-Saakashvili stories. And they published a transcript of a conversation that allegedly took place at Istanbul airport between Saakashvili and Bukeria, where they were allegedly plotting to organize an attack against Rustavi too, which can be blamed on the government in order to trigger anti-government protests. And Bukeria and his wife, Cher Goleshvili, who has been leading anti-Gazprom protests in the country recently, which we'll get to later on. They confirmed that they met Saakashvili at Istanbul airport after coming back from a congress in Brussels. But they denied the coup allegations, and Bukeria ridiculed the transcript and suggested that the Georgian government had made it all up. But as you mentioned, about 1 week later, another dubious website called Ukrainian Revolution then published 2 phone calls, one between Saakashvili and Bukeria, another one between Saakashvili and Rustavi director Gvaramia. And in these phone calls, they are essentially talking about the same thing and talking about erecting barricades to defend Rustavi too and provoking a violent confrontation, which can then be used against the government. And they eventually confirmed the authenticity, but tried to use this to their advantage by saying, well, it proves that the government is conducting illegal surveillance, something which we would never do.
Yeah.
And Saakashvili said, of course, it's all a plot by Russian intelligence. And amid all of this, the Rustavi 2 case in court was, of course, still going on. And a few days after the phone calls were leaked, the Tbilisi City Court ruled in favor of the former shareholder, Kalvashi, who claims that Saakashvili forced him in 2005-2006 to sell his shares below market price to individuals closely tied to the United National Movement. But the court's ruling was immediately appealed, and before the end of the appellate process, there won't be a change in the ownership, and even the broadcaster's top management, including Gvaramia, which had initially been replaced, has been reinstated. So the Rustavi 2 case continues, and as for Saakashvili, the Georgian authorities finally revoked his Georgian citizenship last week, after he had already become a Ukrainian national in May of this year. But this hasn't stopped him from vowing to come back to Georgia and save the country from Russian oligarch Ivanishvili and his incompetent government. So, the story isn't over.
No, it's definitely not. And just to be clear, currently Saakashvili is supposed to be the governor of one of the, a large, incredibly influential, the economic hub of Ukraine, Odessa. He's supposed to be the governor. He's supposed to be overseeing, stopping all of the, mafia crime. And yet he's flying around, to Istanbul airports to meet, clandestinely with other people and talking about overthrowing the government and, forming barricades and all the, there's in one of the leaked tapes, I think it's Bukeria says, but this is going to screw our shares, our stock is going to go down. This is not, this is not a viable solution. And Saakashvili is like, oh, screw that. This is a revolution. Come on. This is war. We've got to, you got to bleed a little bit on, whatever. This again, this, crusading politician in Ukraine, who, as far as I know, doesn't speak Ukrainian. But who cares about that? Yeah, he's gallivanting around trying to stir up chaos in his native country. But Christoph, as you alluded to, that's not the only storm that both the United National Movement and the current Dream Coalition is weathering at the moment. There was also a announcement from the former soccer player turned energy minister, Kake Kalidas. I know I'm mispronouncing that. That Georgia intends to buy gas from Russia and Iran. And this, of course, pissed off the State Department immensely. Who even though they've made this wonderful deal with Iran, no, you still can't trust them. No, don't buy gas from them or anything like that. And of course, Russia, the ultimate evil, never buy gas from them. And Prime Minister Garibashvili quickly flew to Azerbaijan, which provides Georgia about 90% of its gas, to calm their nerves and tell them it's okay, don't worry, we still love your gas, we'll keep buying it. And without missing a beat, the UNM, of course, pounced on this. And as Christoph, as you said, these large-scale protests against Russia and more specifically against Gazprom, the big gas company there, were going on all over the country. As you said, the wife of the UNM leader, Bokiria, it was taking the lead in organizing these protests. And she was actually recently detained for putting up posters mocking Ivanishvili and his, government's plans to work with Gazprom. And while the prime minister, Garibashvili, is a little bit more kind of on the fence about it or doesn't want to, he doesn't want to upset anybody too much, Ivanishvili has gone on to say that this is totally fine, that we should be buying gas from, what's wrong with buying gas from Russia or Iran? This is, I guess, as Christoph, as we've said time and time again on this podcast, where else are you going to go? There's not a lot of reliable sources out there. And again, Iran has so much gas that they want to sell at relatively competitive prices. So, it's sort of like, where else are you going to go? And then this is sort of, again, just sort of added fuel to the fire. So you've got the Rustavi 2, you've got these horrific videos of inmates being raped and tortured by prison guards, and then you've got the whole Gazprom and everything. But I don't know, Christoph, you wrote a really good article in Russia Insider all about Georgia buying Russian and Iranian natural gas. You kind of break down what's going on. You mention how of course Sakashvili couldn't. This is beyond the pale. This. He's got to overthrow the government now, because God forbid they work with Gazprom or the Iranians. And you mentioned how Saakashvili's mayoral candidate in Odessa lost horribly to the pro-Russian candidate, again in an area of Ukraine that just absolutely hates the Russians, according to RFERL and the usual suspects. But break down a little bit what's going on with Gazprom and perhaps, it kind of explains to the listeners again, why is it that Georgia is going to Iran and Russia as opposed to Azerbaijan?
Yeah, I guess the important point here is that Georgia's gas consumption has been steadily increasing over the past couple of years. According to the Georgian energy minister, the gas consumption is expected to reach 2.5 billion cubic meters this year, which is a 27% increase from 2012. And up until now, Georgia has been importing about 90% of its gas from neighboring Azerbaijan. Two countries are very close allies, and both countries play an important part in plans to bring gas from the Caspian Sea to Europe via the Southern Gas Corridor. And in addition to gas from Azerbaijan, Georgia is also retaining 10% of Russia's gas shipments to Armenia as a transit fee. And if the country needs additional supplies, it has been buying a small amount of gas from Russia. But due to the increasing gas consumption, Georgia needs more gas to fill the gap. And according to Georgian Energy Minister Kalatsa, there is no possibility to buy additional gas from Azerbaijan before the second phase of Azerbaijan's Shahdenis project becomes operational. And obviously, it's also a good idea to diversify the country's gas supplies. That's why Kalatsa has been holding talks with Gazprom's Alexei Miller to buy more Russian gas. And furthermore, Georgia is interested in gas from Iran, not only for internal consumption, but also for transiting the gas to Europe, because they can, of course, profit from that. And former Prime Minister Ivanishvili, who is the real power behind the government, and he's arguably the driving force behind these plans. And therefore, he was also the target of the anti-Gazprom protests, which you mentioned. The Sakashvili and Western-funded NGOs are trying to portray Ivanishvili and other proponents of the Gazprom talks as traitors who are selling out to the Russians and the usual stuff. What they don't mention is that Georgia, under the Saakashvili regime, actually purchased quite a lot of Russian gas, even immediately after the war, because there was simply no other possibility. But it's, of course, a perfect opportunity to criticize the so-called pro-Russian government in Tbilisi. And yes, it's just,
No, and maybe we can just quickly touch on that, because this is the quote unquote pro-Russian administration in Georgia right now is something that gets thrown around constantly, in the sort of, Georgian press, and of course from people like Ivanishvili, or, as you mentioned before, former Defense Minister Alesanya has thrown around, they're pro. I'm more anti-Russian than they are.
We talked about Alasanya's sacking in a previous podcast and how this was interpreted by RVRL as the beginning of the end and Georgia turning to Russia.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and it's always this apocalyptic viewpoint. And no doubt these sort of actions fuel these sort of, these allegations, but maybe we could just quickly talk about it, because let's just be honest. This is a very pro-NATO government. This is a very pro-Western government, and they've done literally everything that NATO has asked. I mean, they've gone much farther than previous administrations have ever done, and I think they attempt to maintain a modicum of independence, and suddenly they're pro-Russian, and this is like a trend. This is what happens once you get in bed with NATO and the West and all of these these big sort of business interests and whatnot. If you stray off that path even slightly, you're somehow a traitor. It's again, like you said, it's ridiculous. Saakashvili's buying gas from Russia. No one cares. Ivanishvili does it. Oh, it's World War III. But maybe just talk about that a little bit, because I know we've reiterated this point again and again, but it does seem like we've seen this with like Azerbaijan. When they, like, for instance, when they closed down RFERL, suddenly they're pro-Russian. Kyrgyzstan, which has, they used to have a U.S. base there where they were shipping heroin and jihadis. They get even the slightest bit close with Russia, suddenly we've lost Kyrgyzstan. This is just sort of a trend of these pro-NATO countries, or basically NATO countries, again, exercising just a little bit they just want to be a little bit independent. And suddenly it's World War III. So I don't know, Chris, if you want to just talk about that at all.
Yeah, well, to be fair, the US actually lost Kyrgyzstan recently to Russia. I would say that's what's happened. But Georgia's a different story. The government in Georgia is they remain committed to Euro-Atlantic integration. They are very pro-Western, even in the face of declining support in the country for joining EU and NATO, and in the face of rising pro-Russian sentiment in Georgia. The government, they want to join NATO as soon as possible, and they have made it clear. More than once in recent weeks. But there's, of course, a lot of opposition within NATO, especially from Germany and France, to this idea.
Yeah, of course. It's also like there's not much of an alternative in terms of a viable government there. I mean, we talked briefly about this NDI poll. The UNM is going up a little bit in support. I mean, they're sort of neck and neck with the current government.
Alesanya, people have no idea which party.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. Yeah, what they don't talk about is that most people they don't want to vote for anybody.
Right.
They just find them all corrupt. So it's sort of like, you're kind of stuck. It's like you can do the current government, which is basically doing everything you want. You could get Saakashvili's, which is just psychotic, or you could get Alesanya, who no one really cares about. You're kind of stuck there. But I think we can move on. We'll just hope and pray that Saakashvili does something again soon for us, because he never manages to disappoint. But we are going to shift our gears a little bit and talk about two countries that we've discussed, but this is again a little bit of a geographical switch for us. But in the past several months, there have been these growing rumors and reports that China is becoming increasingly involved in the Syrian war. In late September, Al Masdar News reported that a Chinese naval vessel had actually traveled through the Suez Canal, and it was unclear where exactly it was going. But according to a senior officer in the Syrian army, the Navy vessel actually docked in Latakia in the south. And then this was also followed by reports, both from the Syrian army, that Chinese advisors and military personnel were also expected to join this Navy contingent. Now, this was further confirmed by Russian Senator Igor Mazarov, who's on the Committee of International Affairs in the Russian parliament. And just a few days ago, actually, the Chinese Deputy Foreign Minister, Chen Guopin, also confirmed this. That yes, there are in fact Chinese advisors, helping Syria and the Russians as well. Now, these sort of actions might seem a little bit odd. China historically has never gotten involved. They've had this sort of policy of non-interference. And this goes back this goes back to the 50s. But these actually do come as a result of the sort of increased terrorist action against China that's going on mainly in Syria. There are more and more reports of Uyghurs flooding into Syria. Christoph, you linked up to an Al-Mayadeen news report back in September, basically that Jisr al-Shagur, which is a city in Syria, had basically been taken over by the Turkestan Islamic Party. Also in Deir ez-Zor, which is a big oil-producing area, has also seen hundreds of Uyghurs arrive with the help of ISIS. The Al-Mayadeen report alleged, and this is this isn't true, that 20,000 Uyghurs were being trained by Turkish intelligence and being placed with al-Nusra. I think that figure is way, way high. But it is, I think there is a modicum of truth there in that there are lots of Uyghurs going here. Now, a lot of this does seem to be from the Turkestan Islamic Party, which we talked about, I believe I think it was 2 episodes back, because they were linked to the Grey Wolves, these right-wing nationalists in Turkey that had attacked the Thai consulate. And the Turkestan Islamic Party also links back to the whole passports for Uyghurs that was being facilitated by Turkish intelligence. And, not that long ago, Erdogan sent a very direct message to China during Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's visit, when he had 16 honor guards at the presidential palace dressed in historical costumes. They were meant to represent the 16 historic Turkish empires, including the Uyghur Empire, which was ruled when the Tang dynasty was very weak. And again, the Turkestan Islamic Party has been making a big splash by releasing these awful videos of child soldiers, and you've got children as young as 6 firing AK-47s and other weapons. There are all these reports that the TIP has set up, child soldier training camps and other things like that. And again, ISIS has also kind of stepped up their campaign. In late November, ISIS released pictures of Fan Jinghui, who was a Chinese national who had been executed in Syria. He was an advertising consultant that was working there. And this marks the first time ISIS has killed a Chinese citizen. And just a few weeks ago, there was a recent massacre in Mali at the Radisson Hotel, and 3 Chinese nationals were killed there. So this is very significant that China seems to be getting more and more involved in this. Again, given its historical policy of non-interference. So, Christoph, what's going on here? This was a story that we wanted to cover, I think, last month, but we just didn't have the time to do it. But this is like a whole new China in so many ways. And again, the Ministry of Defense has been stating for a couple years now that the Uyghur threat abroad does constitute a direct threat to China's national security. And, therefore, this is totally within our sort of wheelhouse. We can go and do this. And again, these Uyghurs keep saying, well, we're going to come back to China, and we're going to get you. And you link to an excellent article by Professor Christina Lin, who works at Johns Hopkins. And she, points out that if Assad asked China to help, this would be entirely legal, unlike the West just bombing the shit out of Syria. There's nothing legal about that. And again, we talked many episodes back on a bill that was floating around the Chinese parliament that would basically open the door for special forces to be sent abroad. So, Christoph, I don't know, flesh this out for us. This is a really fascinating story. It's a little bit vague, I suppose. We're not exactly sure what's going on, but talk about, China's actions and talk about the Turkestan Islamic Party, because this is a really interesting group.
Yes, I think a few months ago there were some reports emerging that suggested that China is getting involved. And much has been made of a report which originated from the Israeli disinfo site Debka file, claiming that China's aircraft carrier has arrived in Tartus. And this story was then picked up by some media outlets, and the Russian senator that you mentioned, I think he was also one of these guys who cited this story as claiming as proof for China's involvement in Syria. And this was, of course, not true. And Chinese foreign ministry eventually had to come out after Chinese media picked up these stories and stressed that China is not planning to send any military troops to Syria. Yes. And last month, the China-Syria link was then brought up by a Republican presidential hopeful Ben Carson.
Yes.
That the Chinese are in Syria. And he was then forced to clarify his remarks and said that he actually meant Chinese military equipment and not forces on the ground.
Yeah.
And that's, of course, true. China has been supporting the Syrian government, not only with its veto in the Security Council, but also with military equipment. And perhaps there are also some Chinese military advisors in Syria, but I'm not so sure about this. As for aircraft carriers and fighter jets, I believe it when I see it, and I haven't seen any credible reports so far. But Beijing is, of course, keeping a close eye on the situation in Syria, and the presence of Uyghur jihadists hasn't gone unnoticed in Beijing. Syria is far away, but when Chinese Uyghurs are colonizing Syrian villages and running around with anti-tank missiles, the Chinese authorities can't just ignore all of this. And especially, which you've talked about before, Turkey's role in all of this. I think in episode 9 of our podcast, we talked about Turkey's role in smuggling Uyghurs out of China and funneling some of them into Syria. And Turkey just released new numbers of foreigners detained on the Turkish-Syrian border this year. And Chinese nationals, most certainly Uyghurs, still make up the largest group by far. In 2015, Turkish authorities detained 909 foreigners on the border, 324 of whom were Chinese nationals, 98 Russians, 81 Palestinians, and so on and so forth. Missing completely from the list are, for example, Libyans, Tunisians, and Saudis, but that's another matter. As I mentioned in one of my roundups, the exceptionally high number of detained Chinese nationals raises the questions either the Turkish authorities focus on detaining Uyghurs, or there are more Uyghurs in Syria than previously thought. And many of them are, of course, fighting for the Turkestan Islamic Party, as you mentioned, which has been part of the Western-backed quote-unquote rebel coalition, Jaish al-Fatah, which is led by Al-Qaeda and Ara al-Sham.
Yes, yeah.
and other Uyghurs have joined ISIS. So China is also trying to use the ISIS boogeyman to its advantage. For example, after the Paris attacks, Beijing immediately linked the tragedy to the anti-terror fight in Xinjiang. And recently, after ISIS released a song in Mandarin calling on China's Muslims to take up arms, Beijing argued that the song shows the need for closer cooperation against terrorism. And in this context, terrorism means primarily Uyghur terrorism in Xinjiang and abroad. So China is keeping an eye on what's happening in Syria. And they are, of course, trying to support the Syrian government.
Right. But so, I guess it's safe to say that we probably won't be seeing Chinese soldiers in Syria.
Or aircraft carriers, yes.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, I don't know. To me, it seems somewhat plausible. I mean, it seems somewhat plausible that they would have maybe advisors. There is a close tie there, and I can only assume that they would, maybe have some sort of intelligence people on the ground there, at least to just monitor the situation. As we said, I mean, there's this growing presence of Uyghurs. I think in the Al Mayadeen report, they said, I think they're referring to Jisr al-Shagur, that it resembles Beijing more than Damascus. There were so many Uyghurs there, and again, it's crazy. It's like they're bringing over their whole families into these war zones.
Yes.
Very sort of crazy fanatical sort of a movement going on there. Again, being orchestrated entirely with Turkey's help. And as you said, the Turkestan Islamic Party is very linked to the Grey Wolves and all these sort of things. So yeah, I think this is something we're going to keep an eye out for. Again, it's sort of difficult because China is so tight-lipped about anything having to do with Syria, or I mean, they'll talk about the Uyghurs until the cows come home, but not about what's actually what's really going on. But I can only assume that a country like China just doesn't show their cards. That there is stuff going on in the background, but we're not gonna be privy to that. But sticking within Syria, I think we're going to move to our final segment. But this one is a really a pretty big one, and this is of course on November 24th. Turkish F-16s, which I'm assuming are American, shot down a Russian military jet along the Syrian border. This, of course, became news worldwide in a matter of moments. Of course, Turkey claimed that it warned the jet 10 times over 5 minutes and then fired on it after it entered Turkish airspace for a whopping total of 17 seconds. And you can look, we'll have some links up to some articles on this, and you can see the map. They're talking about this little tiny, I think it's less than 5 kilometers long, little tiny sliver of Turkey that just dips into to Syria. This is very southern Turkey. The Russians, of course, denied that it had entered Turkish airspace, and this is eerily similar to the March downing of a Syrian plane, where it was the same. Turkey blew up the Syrian plane that it claimed entered Turkish airspace. Of course, and maybe we can talk about this, Christoph. Of course, there was a group of guys ready to film the jet crashing. That just they just happened to be in the area, and then the Wall Street Journal reported what they're now calling the relatively moderate Western-backed FSA fired on a Russian rescue helicopter with a U.S. anti-tank missile that was, coming to help. Now, again, this becomes this big sort of, he said, she said argument where Russia's saying we never entered, Turkey saying you did enter. And of course, the line in the West becomes, of course, this is, Russia belligerently, doing all these horrible things in a country that asked them to go there, unlike, the Western countries. And there's actually a pretty good article by Gareth Porter that we'll link up to, which shows how the Turkish claim really doesn't make any sense. And he goes about it two ways. One is just the actual physics of it, where, due to the speed of the jet, and the proximity to Turkey, how fast the jet was actually cruising, that the Turkish, the Turks would have had to have been warning them well before they were ever near the Turkish border. So that raises questions of why were they yelling at them before they were even close to that. And that the Turkish F-16s would have already had to have been in the air for quite some time if they were going to intercept these Russian jets. So what were these F-16s doing? And Gareth Porter also points out that Russia was most likely targeting Turkmen fighters, which is a small ethnic group, that are, of course, completely backed by Turkey. And it was only 4 days before this happened, Erdogan warned Russia that targeting the Turkmen might lead to serious consequences. And Prime Minister Davutoglu stated that Turkish security forces have, quote, been instructed to retaliate against any development that would threaten Turkey's border security, adding, if there is an attack that would lead to an intense influx of refugees into Turkey, required measures would be taken both inside Syria and Turkey. So obviously a direct threat there. And there's actually a whole bunch more interesting threads that we'll get into in a minute in terms of some of the motivations behind this. But of course, it goes without saying, but again, Russia was invited into Syria, unlike Turkey, which has no right to be in Syria, yet they constantly are. And, there was a whole, every foreign leader sort of commenting on this is horrible, or let's ask for calm, blah, blah, blah. And there's a really great one from Iraq's now vice president, Nouri al-Maliki, that pointed out that Turkey, routinely violates Iraqi airspace, but no one seems to care when they're, bombing the Kurds or something like that. But Christoph, I don't know if you want to just kind of flesh out the initial sort of storyline as to what happened and just your reaction to it.
Yes, after the Paris attacks, Russia stepped up its bombing campaign in Syria, and NATO member Turkey was becoming increasingly desperate because its proxies in Syria were being obliterated by Russian bombs, which enabled the Syrian army and Hezbollah to make some progress underground. And the aim of the Russia-led coalition was obviously to move towards the Turkish-Syrian border in order to cut off the vital supply lines to the jihadists. And whereas the Syrian Air Force had not operated in areas close to the Turkish border for quite some time because they were being shut down by the Turks, the Russian Air Force carried out lots of airstrikes near the border. And this was becoming a major problem for Turkey and its favorite proxies, the Turkmen in Syria. The Turkmen, they are spread across several Middle Eastern countries. The total population is thought to range from 1.5 to 3.5 million. And about 200,000 of them live in Syria, mostly in Latakia near the Turkish border. Turkmen are mostly Sunni Muslim and they speak a Turkish dialect. They have close ties to Turkey and the Turks regard them as their kin. And Turkey sees the Turkmen in Syria as a vital part of its strategic depth in Syria and encouraged them early on to join the fight against Assad. Under the guise of supporting their Turkmen brothers in Syria, Turkey could then ramp up its support for jihadists without much scrutiny, and the Turkish government always plays the Turkmen card when it's called shipping arms to Syria, for example.
Right.
And therefore, the Turkish authorities, they were going nuts when a Syrian army backed by Russian airstrikes started attacking quote-unquote Turkmen rebels in Latakia. Although foreign jihadists from the al-Nusra Front, for example, were posting pictures and videos from the same area and reportedly supporting the quote-unquote Turkmen rebels, the Turkish government claimed there are only moderate opposition forces and civilians that are being killed by Russian bombs.
Of course.
On November 20, the Turkish government summoned the Russian ambassador over the intensive bombing of Turkmen villages in northern Syria and warned him that this could lead to serious consequences. And on the evening of the same day, Turkish nationalists gathered in front of what they thought to be the Russian consulate in Istanbul to protest against the Russian airstrikes. What they didn't realize was that they were actually throwing eggs at the Dutch consulate, because the Russian and Dutch consulates in Istanbul are only a few meters away from each other on the same side of the street, and the flags have the same colors. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that our favorite confused Turkish nationalists once again attacked the wrong target. I mean, we talked about this in a previous podcast. They already attacked Chinese targets, which turned out to be Koreans or Uyghurs. So this was obvious that this was going to happen. And as Turkish government and media were ramping up their Save the Turkmen campaign, Turkey then announced on Monday, the 23rd of November, that U.S. Air Force General Paul Selva, who is the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, will visit Ankara on Tuesday to discuss Russian airstrikes on Turkmen-populated areas in Syria. And just as Selva was meeting with high-ranking Turkish officials, the Turkish military then shot down a Russian jet over Syria, which supposedly entered Turkish airspace for 17 seconds. And I think that Selva's presence in Ankara was hardly a coincidence, and given that Turkey is a NATO member, and the Turkish military has very close ties to the US military, I assume that the Turks didn't take the decision on their own. And in fact, American radio show host John Batchelor has said that he was told there were US F-15s nearby the Turkish F-16s, just in case the Russians would be able to immediately respond. And Russian President Putin later also accused the US of leaking the flight path of the Russian jet to the Turkish authorities. So from what we know now about the downing, it looks very much like a pre-planned ambush and not like a spontaneous reaction to an airspace violation. And even more so when we look at the background of Russia's bombing of the poor Turkmen rebels, and especially when we consider what happened after the Russian jet was coming down, because as the jet was coming down, as you mentioned, the moderate Turkmen rebels on the ground then tried to kill the 2 Russian pilots who managed to eject from the aircraft. They only got one of them, but Turkish media was, of course, immediately on the side to cover it all, which raises a few questions. And they then interviewed the deputy commander of the Turkmen rebel brigade, Alparslan Çelik, who turned out to be a Turkish national, son of a former Turkish mayor, and most importantly, a member of the Grey Wolves. And it's, of course, very interesting because the Grey Wolves have not only long-standing ties to Turkish intelligence, but also to US NATO intelligence because they were the go-to guys for Gladio.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, what more do you need? It's interesting. At first, I thought this was much more of Turkey, Erdogan just sort of kind of going rogue. But the more you look into it and you start to see, you've got these American officials in Turkey. You've got, like you said, this, guy who's basically Turkish intelligence running around with the Turkmen, giving interviews. You get the as you said, Putin's. I mean, again, we're taking him at his word, but I wouldn't be all that surprised that the U.S. was giving them information on this. And of course, this comes just after Russia agreed to give information to the United States. And, now look what might have happened. So, yeah, I mean, I guess, well, here's one thing, though, Christoph, because, then you get the whole question of, well, is Turkey going to invoke Article 5 of the NATO declaration? And that seems unlikely. And, of course, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg kind of was like, everyone, chill out. We've got, calm down. But so it's sort of that like upping the ante, but then kind of settling out. But so I don't know.
It was not a NATO decision, but a US-Turkey decision.
Yeah. Okay. No. That's sort of what I was alluding to. And again, the whole. I think that the Turkmen side is definitely one of them, but we also have that. In recent weeks, Russia has also begun destroying the sort of ISIS oil smuggling routes, tankers, and refineries. Yeah. They've been targeting a lot of them. And it seems increasingly likely that this is being orchestrated by none other than Erdogan's son, Bilal. This is the same Bilal Erdogan who was photographed meeting with Yassin al-Qadi, the al-Qaeda, bin Laden's financier and the founder of PTEC and a whole bunch of other crazy deep state things. And there's actually quite a couple good articles we can link up to Bilal Erdogan's involvement in this. But Christoph, what do you make of that? I found that to be another...
Yeah, it's very important, yes. Even before the jet was shot down, Russia has drawn attention to the massive ISIS oil trade. After the US-led coalition has been bombing ISIS for 1 year without much to show for, Putin dropped a bombshell at the G20 meeting last month. He showed his colleagues Russian satellite pictures demonstrating the vast scale of the illegal ISIS oil trade and asked them why they had not targeted the tankers that are stretched for dozens of kilometers. And shortly after that, the US announced that it had, for the first time, destroyed about 100 trucks that have been used by ISIS for smuggling oil. As some may recall, the US has been coming up with all kinds of ridiculous excuses for sparing ISIS oil infrastructure. They said they can't target it because it's Syrian property. They said they can't target it because the bombs would kill innocent civilians. And they said they can't target it because it could harm the environment.
Yeah, right.
And after 1 year of lame excuses, Putin eventually forced the US to act before the Russians then launched really an unprecedented air campaign against ISIS oil facilities. And PBS was so impressed that they even used footage of Russian jets bombing ISIS oil infrastructure for one of their TV reports in which they claimed that these were American jets bombing ISIS. And after Turkey shot down the Russian jet, the Russians then decided to expose Turkey's role in the oil trade. Although the downing of the jet had probably more to do with the situation in Latakia and the Turkmen, Putin then claimed that Turkey shot down the jet to protect its oil trade with ISIS. And when Putin announced that Russia is going to publish evidence, Erdogan immediately said that he will resign if they back up their claims. And when the Russian defense minister then provided proof in a major press conference in which they showed all kinds of pictures and videos, which we would probably have never seen if Turkey had not provoked Russia, Erdogan then dismissed all this as Soviet propaganda and reiterated that he will resign if he sees real evidence. And he also said that actually he has evidence that the Russians are involved in the ISIS oil trade. And so this led to the conflict between Turkey and Russia completely escalating. And just yesterday, Turkish Prime Minister Davutoglu then accused Russia of ethnically cleansing in northern Syria to force out all Turkmen and Sunni population opposed to Assad. And yeah, it's difficult to say what will happen next, but there's a lot going on the Turkish-Syrian border. For example, a few days ago, the US told Turkey to deploy more military along the border to close off key transit routes for ISIS fighters. And Turkey immediately deployed more military along the border, but it looked more like preparations for an invasion than an attempt to seal the border. And shortly thereafter, the Turkish government said, we can't actually close the border, seal the border, because there are the poor refugees who are coming to Turkey. And we are actually trying to resettle about 100,000 refugees in quote-unquote ISIS-free areas in northern Syria. So they are apparently trying to use the refugees to protect their supply lines to the jihadists. And at the same time, the Russians are trying, with the help of the Syrian Kurds, to seal the border and to cut off these supply lines. And Turkey is very, very nervous about this. And they have, for example, published an article a few days ago in one of their media outlets where they are actually warning that Russia and YPG are working together and that they are trying to connect the Turkish-controlled territories in northern Syria to close off to seal the border.
Yeah, no,
That's the concern.
The situation there is, that's where everything is really happening. It's, the Syrian Turkish border, and now we've got Russia involved as well. And just to kind of pick up on a couple things there, we've had this, the oil smuggling almost never gets discussed in Western or in other media as well. Even the alternative media rarely. I mean, there have Zero Hedge has done some very good articles on that that we can link up to, but there's very little about that. We've, as you said, we get all of these different stories about how ISIS does certain, they robbed a bank in northern Iraq. That's where they got all their money. Or they're selling priceless, when they're not destroying priceless works of art, they're selling them on the black market. Or they're doing this, they're selling, they're trafficking young women and girls to other countries or something like that. Whereas no, it's entire, it's like, and then you look at where ISIS is, and it's they're in all of these oil producing areas of Syria, and it's clear that oil is going in and out. I think there was even reports of Bilal Erdogan's, he had his tankers going into weird areas in Syria, and mysteriously at night, and then trucking away tons of oil and stuff like that. So that is in fact where the oil is coming, and they wouldn't be able to do this without Turkey. So again, yet again, as we said many times, this is like the heart of Gladio B right now. This is where everything begins to intersect. As we were just elaborating on that, Christoph. You've got these U.S. generals in Turkey when they're bombing Russian jets. You've got Grey Wolf operatives posing as Turkmen, militia leaders. You've got Erdogan's son, who's a good friend of Yassin al-Qadi, helping ISIS transport oil. I mean, this is like all of the moving pieces are kind of coming together. Quickly, Christoph, before we move on to our final little section, Russia has imposed some economic sanctions against Turkey. They've also halted the production of the Turk Stream pipeline. Is there anything else that we're going to see? I know it's difficult to kind of predict an event like this, but is there anything beyond the sort of war of words? I mean, I know that the usual suspects like RFERL are kind of saying no, but there's not much else that Putin can really do. They go, Steve Gutterman and Brian Whitmore go on and on every week about how, this is just showing you how weak Putin is, that, the Russian public is going to get tired of this and it's going to be another Afghanistan, Soviet war or whatever. What are we going to see in the coming weeks and months, do you think?
I think Turkey made a huge mistake. Economic sanctions are one thing, but Russia is going to respond, and not with economic sanctions. Putin has to respond, or he's going to be perceived as weak at home. They are going to step up their support for the Kurds massively. And we have already seen that they are deploying more jets, and they have deployed S-400s to Syria, which means that the West can't enforce a no-fly zone over Syria. Yeah, they destroyed these plans for them, and I think they also gave S-300s to the Syrian government. There were some reports about that. So yes, they are massively stepping up their military presence in Syria. They will do everything to close to seal the Turkish-Syrian border. And they will probably expose more about Turkey's role in Syria. After when they had this press conference last Wednesday, I think, at the end of the press conference, the Russian Ministry of Defense said they are going to hold another press conference, or going to release more evidence of Turkey's role in training militants and supporting jihadists in Syria. I think in the next couple of days, and they are trying, to shut down or to limit the ISIS oil trade.
Yeah, and also, Russia has the black box from this jet, and they're going, and Putin was, very clear about. I believe he told the Minister of Defense, don't even open this until you get the foreign investigators, because we want this to be completely, we don't want anyone to say we tampered with this. And, it's going to be very, very interesting if it turns out that they never entered Turkish airspace. I don't know, Erdogan he'll just have to resign then. I think we'll leave it there, but this is, again, I don't know. This sort of stuff always fascinates me, because it is a little, it's a window into how these operations work. I mean, it's horrific that you need this horrible, disgusting war going on, but it is a window into how Gladio B operates. And as you said, I mean, we're seeing that. I think too, this is Russia's sort of last chance. They've done very little in terms of propping up independent leaders and some of their I mean, we saw they didn't really do much about Gaddafi. There's a whole litany of people. I think they need to with Assad, because that's kind of it. Otherwise, then they're not a global superpower. But anyway, we're going to move on to our weird terrorism section. Every month, Christoph and I scour the web looking for bizarre and strange stories dealing with the global war on terror. And we actually have two this month, but they're both incredibly bizarre and aren't really true. But it does show you what ISIS has become. But first, we have a very powerful South Korean parliamentary committee has actually accused the North Korean government of having ties to the Islamic State, to ISIS. And, they go on and on about, oh, yeah, of course, this is, obvious. They've got the, North, I don't know, Pyongyang loves ISIS and whatnot. Of course, they seem to kind of miss the point that North Korea is like one of Assad's strongest allies. I think North Korea is one of, I assume, along with Russia and maybe a handful of other countries, that actually have a full staffed embassy in Damascus. There's even the Syrian government dedicated a park to Kim Il Sung. It's it's so crazy. But Christoph, I mean, it demonstrates the level to which people will use ISIS now.
Yes.
So I don't know. You have anything to say on this? I mean, it's obviously not true, but it is like, everyone now is just, oh yeah, ISIS, ISIS, ISIS.
Yes. Yes, it didn't provide any evidence for their claims, and having possible ties to ISIS can mean pretty much anything. For example, after Russia provided evidence of Turkey's involvement in the ISIS oil trade, Erdogan then said that Turkey has proof of Russia's involvement, and his evidence was that a Syrian businessman, George Haswani, who was accused of buying oil from ISIS for the Syrian government, he has also a Russian passport. And on top of that, Erdogan said that a famous Russian chess player is also involved in the ISIS oil trade. And he was probably referring to a former president of the World Chess Federation, a Russian businessman called Kirsan Ilyumchinov, who has been sanctioned by the US for materially assisting the Syrian government. And that was Erdogan's evidence for Russia's involvement in the ISIS oil trade. So if one guy who's somehow involved with ISIS also has a North Korean passport,
right?
Korea can probably say that North Korea has possible ties to ISIS. It's apparently all it takes. I guess they were just trying to demonize the regime in North Korea, and ISIS is, of course, the perfect boogeyman to do that. But as you mentioned, they have actually very good relations with the Assad government, and according to Der Spiegel, North Korean nuclear experts are actually in Syria helping Assad build a nuclear bomb together with Iran and Hezbollah. So which one is it?
Right, yeah, exactly.
Supporting ISIS, or is Korea helping Assad build a nuclear bomb?
I mean, it was alleged that in Operation Orchard, which was an Israeli operation that bombed Syria's Al-Kibar nuclear facility, that there were North Korean technicians there, that they had helped in constructing it. No, I mean, you're totally right. It's just the great I mean, it's just showing you the level to which and this is a little bit different because I don't think that South Korea would have accused Pyongyang of being in league with Al Qaeda. I mean, maybe they have, but I don't think so. ISIS is like it's sort of like anyone can be an ISIS thing, including apparently the Dalai Lama. And this is the second part of this. China's top religious affairs committee, the chairman of it, Zhu Weikun, actually said that yes, the Dalai Lama was sympathetic with the Islamic State because the Dalai Lama, sort of asked for calm and negotiations or something like that. And he said that this shows that the Dalai Lama deep down sympathizes or approves of ISIS. Now, I can speak for both Christoph and myself. Neither of us like the Dalai Lama. He's obviously been since the 50s a paid CIA asset. The Tibet was not a great place to live under the Dalai Lama's regime, but this is so crazy. I mean, this is this is almost even crazier than North Korea and ISIS. That the headline, in the Washington Post is Chinese officials said the Dalai Lama supports the Islamic State, but then when you actually read it, it's he deep down sympathizes with them because he believes in, peace negotiations or understanding and respecting them or something like that.
Reminds me of David Cameron's comment that Corbyn and the other British officials who are opposing bombs on Syria are terrorist sympathizers.
Yes, exactly. And I think it just, perfect. This is just sort of expanding out this sort of new level of paranoia and insanity. And we're laughing because it's like, the Dalai Lama and, North Korea are, meeting at the Legion of Doom with al-Baghdadi and, these other people. But it is worrying because it is like that sort of that kind. It reminds me a bit of this sort of level of paranoia and insanity that we saw, in the wake of 9/11 and then later in Iraq. when it was just everyone is a terrorist. It's right. It's like, Corbyn and the North Koreans and the Dalai Lama and, anybody in between, the Russians, they're all, everyone's an enemy. So it is like, it is very scary. But of course, Christoph and I we always joke around and laugh during this podcast. And I think that's good because there are so many psychopaths out there. And if you can't laugh at them, then they've ultimately won. But I think we're going to leave it there for this episode of Porkins' Great Game. And if you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to hear some more of me and Christoph, then please go to PorkinsPolicyReview.com. You can find this podcast and every other podcast there. And of course, Christoph, there are so many other stories going on in Central Asia, the Caucasus, the global war on terror, so much that we never get to cover all of them in a single podcast. But where can people go to read more of your work?
Yes, they can find more of my work on my blog, christophgerman.blogspot.com, and of course on Boiling Frogs Post and on Russia Insider. And we should probably also mention that we are working on a new media project, which Sibel is working on, and we will have more details for you soon. But stay tuned. I think it's going to be a great project and lots of good people involved.
Yeah, absolutely. If you haven't listened yet, Sibel actually has a brief, it's about 12-minute podcast on Boiling Frogs Post. And I believe there's also a transcript of it if you want to just read it, if you're not a member. But yeah, it's gonna. Christoph and I are really excited about it. There's, of course, the most of, if not all, of the BFP family will be a part of this new media project. And if you want to like kind of keep updated on all of this, we'll provide a link in the show notes so you can join the email list and you'll be posted about everything. But as Sibel said in the podcast, with some really big name people are going to be involved, and we'll be releasing the logo and a little bit more information in the coming weeks. So definitely stay tuned. And yeah, Christoph and I are really excited about the new project. But anyway, thank you all so much for listening to this podcast. Again, you can find my work at PorkinsPolicyReview.com. You can find Christoph's at christophgerman.blogspot.com. And you can always follow me through email blasts or the RSS feed. And you can always follow both Christoph and I on Twitter. You can follow me at Porkins Policy, and you can follow Christoph at New Great Game. Well, thank you all so much for listening. And Christoph, thank you for joining me again.
Thanks, Piers.
Feeling downtrodden, fresh kid turned rotten. I can't believe how naive that I've gotten. Over the years, seems like I'm getting dumber. Reminiscing to a time when I was younger with a hunger. Full of dreams, determination, self-esteem. But now it seems they hesitate to be on my team. You know the routine. When you winning, they grinning all up in your face like they was with you from the beginning. But on the flip side, when you watch them like a riptide, fools clown by how you slipped and let shit slide. Beside the fact, my voice is whack. Clowns is running around, talk about a smoke crack. Ain't got no homies that got my back. Yeah, I'm a brother, but sometimes I don't feel black. My girl is white, my game ain't tight. Niggas who ain't seen me in a while be like, dude, you alright? Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, what's up, fat lip? And I say, coolin'. Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, what's up, fat lip? And I say, coolin'. Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, what's up, fat lip? And I say, coolin'. Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, going like a sucker almost every day. In the back of your mind, you probably thinking I was gay. But nah, I'm just a bitch ass nigga. The type to get jacked if I was a rich ass nigga. See, I've been a loser just about all my life. Type to tryna turn a hoe to a housewife. What do you expect? I give respect and feel for a hoe niggas keep in check. I'm far from hard, emotionally scarred. On Pico Boulevard, I was regarded as a retard. I make myself sick, get on my own nerve. Immature, insecure, grown up nerd. Half-spin MC on a label that's unstable. Chopping bliggy on the table. Respect with the wild like a song. Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, what's up, fat lip? And I say, coolin'. Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, what's up, fat lip? And I say, coolin'. Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, what's up, fat lip? And I say, coolin'. Who am I kidding? Who am I fooling? When they be like, what's up, fat lip?
Hey man, yeah man, what's up with it? Still got it? Yeah, I've been working on my step. Hey, check this out, y'all. Check